Hi there, welcome to this, the daily briefing. There's some stuff emerged after the Aston Villa game, which you're possibly already aware of, but I'd like to revisit, but just in case some or many of you, like me, missed it the first time round, because it is truly weird, and some of it is frankly unpleasant. Flags, that's today's topic, but flags upset people. Remainer left-leaning folk don't like flags. But ordinary people, I would suggest, look at just nations' flags and just kind of go, oh, look, we've got some Koreans in, we've got some Irish in, we've got some Cypriots. Isn't it great? We've got all these people in. Whereas what can't be dealt with is how others or some people react when they see a flag, and the inference that they're picking up from a flag. So, for example, some people will see the Union flag because it's only a jack when it's on a ship, kids, and say, the damage and torture of Imperial Britain is very one of the worst things, and they'll get very emoted about that. And some people look at an Irish flag and go, the troubles. I think the reality is context, and I keep banging on about this all the time, and because it opens a window, lets some fresh air and some light into a lot of situations. Not everything, but most things. And if I see an Israeli flag and it's just being draped over something, along with a Korean flag or an Irish flag or a Cypriot flag, and other flags are available, I don't think to myself, I think if you're a crazed Palestinian, it probably does trigger you a little bit. But that's your problem, it's not mine. And it perhaps isn't the problem of the person who's draped the flag over the thing on the stadium. I think what does make a difference is if you had the Irish tricolour, for example, with Brits out marker penned across the front of it. That's definitely, that's not there to say, we're down from County Kerry and we're having a great time out on the lash at the game. That doesn't say that. That says something completely different. And also the way that you're using your flag. So if you've just got it down there or you're holding it up or whatever, if you're not accompanying that, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but I'm just trying to make the point. But if you're holding a thing up and you're not screaming something awful, as people were when they were driving around London earlier this week with loud hailers on the roofs of their cars and some flags, which ordinarily I wouldn't have an issue with. But the way those flags were presented, the way those flags were used. So there's a video on theboyhotspur.com, and there's also some photos of the other thing I'm going to come on to as well. You can Google them, get them anywhere, but theboyhotspur.com is my blog, and that's where you can get a written form of some of these thoughts, and you can see these images and what have you today. And so we had a steward going up to a kid and saying to him, this is neither the time or the place. Put that in your pocket or chuck it out. And just from the way the kid behaved and what we saw, I think the situation was benign. The slightly amusing thing was the steward said, I've got the FA on the phone. I don't know if that was the case, but it just made me giggle. So we had that steward. And then we had a broader setting, an issue that came from a broader setting, which was the 10,000 fans that were all Tottenham fans, okay, so that's another thing, that were allowed into the stadium for the Villa game. And the club, in its wisdom, decided not to remove the tarpaulins that were covering the seating on the lower tiers. And this was presumably to benefit their obligations with their sponsors because the game was being televised. And it may have had a small something to do with security worries because there have been protests and so, what have you. But the fans were splashed. They were sprinkled all over the stadium. And so, for example, there were some fans on like that second tier, but the guy with the Israeli flag, our friend, the political activist, he was up in the gods. I mean, and that's 60 quid for a seat in the bleachers. That's not funny. And does that make people annoyed? Does that make people feel short-changed? You've been out of a business for a long time, and for a lot of us, going into these places, you kind of hope it's going to live up to your expectations. Most of us aren't day-to-day we're not looking for a lot, but we're looking for, just be nice to me. That would be a good sort of base level for returning to a pub or a restaurant or whatever. I don't want a disaster. I don't want to have to deal with stuff. Just be nice to me. So the second incident involving stewards, and for that you can go to theboyhotspur.com or you can just Google it. There was a fan. There was a photo sequence of a fan who had clearly come from at least the second tier, but may have come from the gods. And he was going where he wasn't supposed to be going. He was heading down the gangway towards the pitch. Six-handed. And one of the pictures has got this red-headed steward with his elbow up. This is common assault. Now, I don't know what this guy said, but by the way he was dressed and his athletic build, says me, he didn't look to me like an absolute lunatic. He looked like the kind of guy that one might bump into on the counter in B&Q or something like that. Yeah, he just looked like somebody's dad. He did not look like, some hooligan who's having a bit of it. And what was he going to do? There's nobody there. He was told by the stewards that the players would be coming out to do the see you next year, you've been amazing, good night, Vienna, and all that one. They didn't come out. There was an announcement on the tannoys after half an hour, which is a long time in a stadium with only 10,000, and that's if all of them stayed and didn't have to go somewhere else to catch a train, which is what most normal people do. So these people have been left there, and then they're told, now go home, please leave the premises. And I know there were some sour responses to that. I put a video of a young guy, George, up on the blog yesterday, and quite rightly, he was like 60 quid, and they haven't even come out. And he was booing. And you got to bear in mind who was in the audience for that thing. These weren't punters that walked in off the street. You weren't dealing with muck here. These are people who believed that they had relationships with the club. These were people who had emotionally invested and financially invested. These were people who had, on a serial basis, been a repeat customer for the club. And, if you like, a preferred punter. Because it was only 10,000 people out of a potential 42 and whatever it is, 50,000, however many home fans we allow in. And like I was saying, just treat these people well. Treat them nicely. And the idea that the guy, I can understand he's kind of broken the rules by making a surge down the gangway or whatever you call it there, in order that somebody can actually hear him protest. Somebody can hear him vent because he's angry. 60 quid down the hole. Spurs didn't play very well. And there's like all these stewards on him. I think you can talk somebody like that down. I mean, you look at the kids that broke into, the millennials that broke into Old Trafford. You can't talk a mob like that down. And you can't talk down all these kids with the like Primark hoodies up and yeah, man. And there was some kids sniffing a white substance off of a corner flag. You can't talk them down. But somebody's dad, as long as he isn't absolutely paralytic or off his head, you can talk him down. You don't need to put 6 high-vis gentlemen on him. And it's such a bad look. But then, after I've read these 2 bits, because stewards getting bad publicity isn't exactly breaking news. In fact, who's pals with the steward? They can only have fewer friends if they were policemen. Do you know what I mean? But it then emerged, and again, you can Google it, but it's on theboyhotspur.com. Spurs were selling mouldy pies. Right, now, I'm just going to pause here because I just want to emphasise how bad this is. Not like, tell you how upset your tummy could be if you ate one. But just in terms of, we've had a pandemic, and I've got no idea who, in truth, was coming in and out of Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. But that tells me that those pies, as a matter of course, perhaps, aren't even stored in a chilled area, that they might be left on a shelf. They're not refrigerated, and they're certainly not frozen. And if I was going to buy pies in bulk of that quality, and we all know the thing we're talking about, it's got about a meat percentage so low you could almost pass it off as vegan under the right circumstances, I'd stick them in a deep freeze, because they cook from frozen. It's not a high-end product here. But there's a photo of a guy with this moulded pie. So that's been sat at room temperature and gone past its sell-by date, and then started to turn into something that was waving at you. And then, as I was digesting that piece of information, photos showed up of hospitality drinks that had been put to one side on a surface of a bar, presumably for, I don't know, a certain tier of punter. And if you go somewhere and you get a free drink, the way you do it is very straightforward. You say hello to the person, you treat them as if they've paid, and with the same generosity, of spirit and goodwill, and you're nice to them. So you pour the pint, and then you do, put the thing down with the branding facing them on the right little beer mat and say, there you go, you enjoy that. That's how you give somebody a pint, whether they've paid for it or whether you're giving it to them as a gratis. The photo was of, I don't know, say 20 pints, 18 pints on a big tray. And those pints have been sat there for a good long while. They looked like urine samples. Yeah, that's the end of it. They didn't even look like draft, old, peculiar cider. They looked like, and it just says to me, and I don't want to go too deep into the sort of philosophical recesses of my haggard brain, but it just says to me that if your business has been in suspended animation, right? That's a pleasant way of putting it, for some considerable period of time, and your fans come back, and if we say that most of them are making the same sort of noises before they get there as I have been on this little bit of tape to you, and saying, look, it might be a bit rusty, but just be nice to me. That's all. You got a steward trying to manhandle a flag because of what he's interpreted the flag to mean. You've got a fan who isn't very happy, and perhaps rightly so. He's been charged a lot of money. He might have had a really bad seat, and Spurs were a bit rubbish. But what sort of damage is the guy going to do walking down a gangway? And why do you need to put your elbow up against his throat? This is really... And why is it when you buy a pie, it's mouldy? I mean, it's got white stuff growing on it. It's not like I didn't like it. It's mouldy. It's off. And why, when you're giving away pints to people, why are they put... Is there anything more disgusting? Is there anything that says how little love you have for the person? Contempt you hold to me. Right, we've got 16 people coming. They all get a free drink each. So just put the drinks on there, and when those are done, you start charging them, and we open the cash bar. Except for it's not cash, it's wireless, you know what I mean? All of these things tell me that there is a toxicity coming out of Tottenham. And I've jokingly referred to the new stadium as a soul-harvesting device on numerous occasions on the blog, because there were so many things done badly in the construction and all that jazz. But this is horrible. This is really, really horrible. So, I just don't know. Harry Kane, Gary Neville, that interview on the golf course explains everything. It certainly explains the Sky exclusive. And rather, what's the word I'm looking for? Rather bewilderingly, to give it a generous twist, the interview, when you read it in black and white, what Kane says allows one guy to write a piece saying Kane's going, and then then allows another chap to write a piece saying he's definitely staying. It says to me that Harry Kane is doing his absolute level best to conduct himself decently, honourably, and to put very gently the burden upon Levy to solve the problem. And that's what that says to me. I've read a little bit into it, but I haven't invented anything. And I think if you come away from these dialogues, the text summaries of these things, and you make definitive, absolute pronouncements, well, I've read that and I can tell you he's off. I've read that. You'll get somebody next to you say, well, I've read it, and for me, it says he's definitely staying. And I think the truth, as ever, is somewhere in the middle. And I think he's setting it up. Because at the end of the day, I think we all know that Daniel is in an impossible position. And I've gone over my time, so I don't want to do, why it's impossible. We know most of it is self-inflicted and predates COVID and all that jazz. But I think that's the deal there, that it's down to Levy to pull something stellar out the bag. We know he can, because he's been in trouble before today, and he managed to find the wages for that Welsh fella. But we'll see, I guess. But anyway, be lucky, don't order any mouldy pies, and if somebody offers you a free pint, I'll do that little trick where you sort of just dink it on the edge of the table and see if there's any fizz left in it. We'll speak again. Keep it Tottenham.